I found out my twin sister has been living my life behind my back. My own reflection became a stranger, and the life I thought I was living was a lie someone else was telling. My name is Amelia, and at 28 years old, I thought I had my life mapped out. I was a senior project manager at a tech firm, had a loving boyfriend of 3 years, Liam, and a family that, while scattered, was always there for me. The only constant anomaly in my otherwise structured life was my identical twin sister, Aria. We were mirrors of each other. Same dark auburn hair, same green eyes, same sprinkle of freckles across our noses. But where I was structure, she was chaos. Where I was planning, she was impulse. I had just returned from a 3-week-long soul-crushing business trip to Singapore. It was one of those work assignments that sucked the life out of you, leaving only a husk of jet lag and a desperate need for the familiar comfort of home. As I turned the key in the lock of my apartment, the familiar click was a welcome sound. I pushed the door open, dropping my suitcase by the entrance with a heavy thud. The air inside felt still, too still. Liam should have been at work, but the apartment usually held a faint echo of his recent presence. A coffee mug in the sink, a throw pillow askew from where he'd been watching TV. Today, there was nothing. It was sterile, like a hotel room. A small, cold knot of unease began to form in my stomach. I chalked it up to exhaustion. I was just tired, seeing shadows where there were none. I shuffled into the bedroom, ready to collapse onto our bed and sleep for a day. But something on my dresser caught my eye. It was a small, framed photo of Liam and me from our last anniversary. But as I got closer, my breath hitched. It wasn't me. It was Aria. She was wearing my favorite blue dress, the one I had worn for that dinner. Her head was thrown back in a laugh, her hand resting on Liam's arm, and he was looking at her with that same adoring expression I thought was reserved only for me. The resemblance was, as always, unnerving, but the details were wrong. She held her cigarette differently than I did, between her middle and index finger, a classic Aria tell. My heart started pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. Why was this picture here? And where was the one of us? My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A prank? A mix-up? But Aria hadn't been to our apartment in months, not after the last big fight about her irresponsibility. I snatched the frame, my hands trembling. That's when I noticed the corner of another photo peeking out from behind it. I pulled it out. It was a group shot from my company's summer gala, an event I had explicitly missed because of my Singapore trip. And there, in the center of the photo, beaming and holding a champagne flute, was Aria. She was wearing the designer gown I had bought for the occasion, the one hanging in my closet, unworn. She was laughing with my boss, her arm linked with my work best friend. No one was looking at her with suspicion. They were all looking at her like she was me. The knot in my stomach tightened into a block of ice. This wasn't a prank. This was something else, something sinister and deeply violating. My mind flashed back to the last few months, the odd comments from Liam about a conversation I didn't remember having, the thank you email from my boss about a charity drive I had no recollection of organizing. I had dismissed them as signs of burnout, my brain misfiring from stress. But now, a horrifying, impossible truth was beginning to dawn. I sank to the floor, the 2 photographs clutched in my hands, the sterile silence of the apartment suddenly screaming with 1,000 unspoken lies. My life, the one I had worked so hard to build, felt like a house of cards, and Aria had just blown out the foundation. The initial shock gave way to a cold, methodical dread. I wasn't a hysterical person. I was a project manager. My job was to look at a complex system, identify the problems, and find a solution. And right now, my entire life was the most complex, broken system I had ever encountered. I spent the next few hours in a fugue state, moving through my apartment like a ghost, searching for clues. My laptop was the first place I looked. I opened my photo library, scrolling back through the last 3 weeks. There were dozens of new pictures I hadn't taken. Pictures of me at a brunch with my parents. Aria wearing my casual linen blouse, smiling across the table at our mother as if she belonged there. There were pictures of me at the dog park with Liam and our golden retriever, Cooper. Aria throwing the ball, her laughter captured in midair, Liam's arm wrapped around her waist.
Each photo was a fresh stab of betrayal, a new piece of evidence that my life had been hijacked. How was this possible? How could she walk into my office, greet my colleagues, date my boyfriend, and sit with my parents, and no one, not a single person, noticed? I felt a dizzying sense of unreality, like I was the main character in a bizarre psychological thriller. I moved on to my emails. There it was, the thread with my boss about the charity drive. Aria, as me, had been eloquent, efficient, charming. She had secured a donation that I had been struggling to get for months. A wave of nausea hit me. She was better at being me than I was. My calendar was next. It was a roadmap to my stolen life. A dinner reservation at the Oak Room for a date night with Liam, marked as completed. A coffee meeting with my work best friend, Vanessa. A yoga class I had been meaning to try. She had done it all. She hadn't just been filling in, she had been living and seemingly thriving. The question that burned in my mind was why? Why would Aria do this? We had our issues, sure. She resented my stability, I think, and I was often frustrated by her lack of direction. But this was beyond sibling rivalry. This was an act of erasure. I thought about our last phone call before I left for Singapore. I had been stressed, complaining about the long hours, the pressure at work. I remembered her voice on the other end, a little too sympathetic, a little too eager. "You work too hard, Amelia," she had said. "You deserve a break. Maybe you should just disappear for a while. Let someone else handle things." At the time, I thought she was just being her usual flippant self. Now her words sounded like a premeditated invitation. The scope of her deception was staggering. It wasn't just one or two events, it was a sustained, methodical campaign. She had studied me, my mannerisms, my schedule, my relationships, and then she had stepped into my shoes so seamlessly that she had fooled everyone. The thought made me feel profoundly lonely. If no one could tell the difference between me and my sister, what did that say about my individuality? Was I so easily replaceable? My identity, the very core of who I was, felt like a costume that anyone could just slip on. I had to know more. I needed to understand the depth of the lie. I opened my social media, the private accounts where I posted snippets of my life. There were new posts from the last 3 weeks. A picture of a sunset from my favorite jogging spot with the caption, "Much needed perspective." A selfie with Liam, his face pressed against my cheek with the caption, "My rock." The comments were filled with hard eyes and affirmations from my friends, my family, my colleagues. They were all directed at Aria, thinking she was me. My world wasn't just a lie, it was a performance, and I hadn't even been on the stage. I had to confront her. But as I scrolled through the digital evidence of my stolen life, a new, more terrifying thought began to take root. What if she didn't want to give it back? Confronting Aria felt like preparing for battle. I spent the night not sleeping but strategizing. I needed to see her face when I laid out the evidence. I needed to understand the why. I drove to her apartment the next morning, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Her building was a rundown complex on the other side of town, a stark contrast to my pristine high-rise condo. It was a physical representation of the divergence in our lives. I knocked on her door, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. When she opened it, the sight of her face sent a jolt through me. It was like looking in a distorted mirror. She was wearing an old band t-shirt and sweatpants, her hair a messy bun on top of her head. She looked tired, but her eyes, my eyes, held a flicker of something I couldn't quite read. "Amelia?" she said, her voice laced with a feigned surprise that was almost insulting. "What are you doing here? I thought you weren't back until next week." I pushed past her into the apartment, the familiar scent of her clove cigarettes and stale coffee filling my lungs. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I threw my phone onto her cluttered coffee table, the screen lit up with the photo from the summer gala. "Explain this," I said, my voice dangerously low. Aria glanced at the phone, then back at me. For a split second, a look of panic flashed across her face, but it was quickly replaced by a mask of defiance. She shrugged, a casual, infuriating gesture. "It's a photo, Amelia. People take them." I swiped to the next picture, the one of her and Liam at the anniversary dinner. And this? And this? I swiped through the gallery, a digital slideshow of her betrayal. Each photo was a fresh accusation.
With each swipe, her composure cracked a little more. She went from defiant to defensive, her voice rising. "What did you expect me to do? You were gone. You left a huge void. Your work, your boyfriend, your parents, they were all just there, waiting." Her words were a slap in the face. Waiting? For what? For you to pretend to be me? Pretend? She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. I wasn't pretending. I was living. I was actually living your life, instead of just going through the motions like you do. She stood up, pacing the small living room, her energy frenetic. "You have no idea what you have, Amelia. You have this perfect, beautiful life, and you treat it like it's a burden. You complain about your job, you stress about your relationship, you see your family as an obligation. I just wanted to see what it felt like. I wanted to feel what it was like to be loved, to be respected, to be you." Her confession was a twisted mix of envy and justification. It wasn't just a prank or a moment of madness. It was a deep-seated desire to inhabit my existence. "Did it ever occur to you that it's my life?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and hurt. "Did you ever think about how violated I would feel, how betrayed?" She stopped pacing and looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine remorse in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I'm sorry you feel that way," she said, her tone cold, "but I'm not sorry I did it. I got the charity donation you couldn't. I smoothed things over with your mom after that fight you had. I even told Liam you loved him, something I haven't heard you say in months." Her words were like poison darts, each one finding its mark. She was twisting the knife, suggesting that she wasn't just a replacement, but an improvement. She had been a better daughter, a better employee, a better girlfriend. She had been a better me. I stood there, the weight of her confession crushing me. I had come here for answers, for an apology, for some semblance of understanding. But all I got was a mirror held up to my own perceived failings, reflected through the eyes of my twin sister. She hadn't just stolen my life. She had used it to highlight everything she thought I was doing wrong. I left her apartment without another word, the silence of the car ride home a deafening roar. The confrontation hadn't brought me closure. It had only opened up a deeper, more terrifying chasm. Arya wasn't just a sister who had made a terrible mistake. She was a rival who believed she was better at being me than I was. And now I had to go back to that life, to the people who couldn't tell the difference, and figure out if any of it was still mine. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of city lights and internal chaos. Arya's words echoed in my mind, a toxic mantra. I was a better you. The claim was so audacious, so deeply unsettling, that it began to plant seeds of doubt in the fertile ground of my insecurity. Had I become complacent? Had I been taking my life for granted? I walked back into my apartment. The space that had felt sterile now felt haunted. Every object seemed to hold a memory of Arya's presence. The coffee mug on the counter was one she would have used. The book on my nightstand, the one I hadn't started, was turned to page 50. She had been here, not just as a visitor, but an occupant. Liam came home a few hours later, his cheerful, "Honey, I'm home," sounding like a line from a play I hadn't auditioned for. He walked over and kissed me, a familiar, comforting gesture that now felt foreign and loaded with questions. Was he kissing me, or the memory of her? "How was your day?" he asked, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "Long," I managed to say, my voice tight. "You seem tired," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "The trip must have really taken it out of you. You were so much more relaxed before you left." The comment, meant to be caring, was like a knife twisting in my gut. Relaxed? That was Arya. Arya was impulsive and carefree. I was structured and prone to anxiety. He had noticed a difference, but he had interpreted it as a positive change. I spent the next few days in a state of hyper-awareness, observing my own life as if I were an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. I watched Liam move around the apartment, his easy smile, his familiar habits.
I found myself replaying our conversations, searching for hints, for moments where he might have been talking to Arya instead of me. He mentioned a movie we had watched together while I was gone, describing a specific scene he loved. I had never seen it. He brought up a conversation we had about his future at his company, a conversation in which I had been incredibly supportive and encouraging. I remembered a conversation, but it had been filled with my usual pragmatic worries, not blind support. She had been a better girlfriend to him. She had given him the unwavering support and carefree fun that I, in my stress and exhaustion, had been failing to provide. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow. It wasn't just that she had deceived him, it was that he had preferred the deception. I started to question everything about our relationship. Was our love real, or was it just a role she had stepped into and played better than me? The same doubts crept in when I talked to my parents. I called them, and my mother gushed about how wonderful it was to see me so happy and present at the brunch Arya had attended. "You seemed so much lighter, dear," she said, like a weight had been lifted. Again, the praise was for Arya's version of me. I was an understudy in my own life, and the critics were raving about the lead actress. I felt my identity dissolving, the lines between Amelia and Arya blurring until I wasn't sure who I was anymore. If the people who knew me best couldn't tell the difference, and in fact preferred the imposter, what was left of the real me? I had to know. I had to find out if Liam could see me, if he could truly differentiate between the woman he loved and her reflection. A plan, born of desperation and a desperate need for reassurance, began to form in my mind. It was a test of his love, a test of our connection, and a test of my own identity. I would recreate one of the dates Arya had gone on with him. I would wear the same dress, go to the same restaurant, and I would watch him. I would look for a flicker of recognition, a sign that he knew on some level that he was with a different woman. It was a dangerous game, a high-stakes gamble with my heart on the line. But as I stood in my closet, pulling out the blue dress from the anniversary photo, I knew I had no other choice. I had to find out if I was just a placeholder in my own life, or if there was something uniquely me that he, and only he, could see. The evening of the test arrived with a palpable sense of dread. I stood in front of the mirror, the blue dress clinging to my body like a second skin. It was the same dress Arya had worn in the photograph, the one Liam had complimented her on. I styled my hair the way I usually did, not the way Arya would have. I applied my makeup with a steady hand, a stark contrast to the tremor in my soul. I was trying to be myself, but I was using Arya's script. The restaurant, the Oak Room, was dimly lit and intimate, the kind of place where whispered secrets felt safe. Liam was already at our table when I arrived, a single red rose resting next to his place setting. He stood up when he saw me, his smile genuine and warm. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. The words were the same ones he had said to Arya, I was sure of it. I forced a smile and sat down, my heart hammering against my ribs. The conversation started off easily, a discussion of our respective days. But I was waiting for my opening. I needed to bring up something specific. Something from the date Arya had had with him here. I took a sip of my wine, gathering my courage. "You know," I began, my voice a little too bright, "I was thinking about that night we came here a few weeks ago, when we talked about you taking that new position at work." I watched his face closely, searching for any sign of confusion or recollection. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah, that was a great conversation. I was so worried about it, but you made me feel like I could conquer the world." His words were a direct echo of what Arya had told me she had said. She had been the supportive, encouraging partner. I, on the other hand, had been hesitant, pointing out the risks and the long hours. Now I had to decide, do I agree with the memory he has, or do I correct him? Do I play the role of Arya, or do I force him to see me? I took a deep breath and chose the latter. Actually, I said, my voice softer now, more hesitant, I remember being really worried for you. I thought the risks were too high, and I was scared you'd be unhappy. The silence that followed was deafening. Liam just stared at me, his smile slowly fading. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, a brief moment of cognitive dissonance as his reality clashed with mine. "What?" he said, shaking his head slightly. "No, that's not what you said at all. You told me to go for it, that you'd be proud of me no matter what." His certainty was a punch to the gut. He didn't just remember the conversation, he remembered her version of it. He had a clear, vivid memory of a conversation with my sister, thinking it was with me. I felt a wave of dizziness, the room spinning around me. I tried to recover, to laugh it off as a simple mistake. "Oh, I must be misremembering," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I've been so exhausted from the trip." But the damage was done. The easy intimacy between us had been shattered, replaced by a thick, awkward tension. The rest of the dinner was a performance. We talked about superficial things, avoiding the elephant in the room. But I could see the change in him. He was looking at me differently, with a hint of curiosity, of speculation. He was trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the woman he had been dating for the past 3 weeks. As we left the restaurant and walked to the car, the silence was heavy. He opened my door for me, a gentlemanly gesture that now felt like a formality. When he got in the car, he didn't start the engine right away. He turned to me, his expression serious. "Amelia," he said, his voice low, "is everything okay? You seem different." The question hung in the air, a double-edged sword. Was he finally seeing the real me, or was he just noticing the contrast between me and the more relaxed version he had grown accustomed to? I didn't know how to answer. I could either continue the lie, pretending to be the woman he wanted, or I could tell him the truth and risk losing everything. I looked into his eyes, searching for a sign, a clue, anything to guide me. But all I saw was my own reflection, a stranger staring back at me from the depths of his uncertainty. The drive home was suffocating. Liam's question, "Is everything okay? You seem different," reverberated in the confined space of the car. It was the opening I had been both dreading and hoping for. I could feel the words bubbling up inside me, a confession so monstrous it felt like it would burn my throat on its way out. But I couldn't do it. Not yet. I was still trapped in the maze of my own fear, afraid that the truth would not set me free, but would simply destroy everything I had left. "I'm just tired from the trip," I repeated, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "I think I just need some time to get back to normal." He seemed to accept the explanation, or at least,
He was willing to let it go for the night, but the distance between us was now a chasm. When we got home, he gave me a perfunctory kiss on the cheek and retreated to his office, claiming he had some work to catch up on. I knew it was an excuse. He needed space, away from the different version of me. I spent the night alone in our bed, the sheets feeling cold and unfamiliar. I was losing him. Not to another woman, but to a better version of myself, a phantom created by my sister. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't live in this limbo, questioning every glance, every word. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I skipped work, calling in sick. I needed to be sharp, focused. I spent the morning preparing, not for a test this time, but for an execution. The execution of my old life, whatever was left of it. When Liam came home for lunch, as he often did, I was waiting for him in the living room. I had a folder on the coffee table in front of me, filled with the evidence I had gathered, the photos, the emails, the calendar entries. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. He looked at the folder, then at me, his expression wary. He sat down across from me, his posture tense. "What's going on, Amelia?" I didn't beat around the bush. I pushed the folder towards him. While I was in Singapore, Arya was here. She was impersonating me. I watched his face as I said the words, searching for a reaction. Shock, disbelief, denial. But what I saw was none of those things. I saw a flicker of understanding, a dawning horror that was so profound it was almost a recognition.
It was as if a part of him had already known, had sensed the deception, but had been unable or unwilling to confront it. He didn't open the folder. He just kept his eyes on me, his face pale. "What?" he whispered, the word barely audible. "She went to your work events. She went on dates with you. She had brunch with my parents," I continued, my voice gaining strength as I spoke the truth aloud. "She was living my life." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Then I asked the question that had been torturing me for days. "Did you know? On some level, did you know it wasn't me?" It was a cruel question, an impossible one, but I had to ask. I had to know if I was the victim of elaborate deception or a willing participant in my own replacement. He shook his head, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. "No," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I didn't know. But there were moments. Things felt off, little things. The way she laughed, the way she held her coffee. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just missing you. I thought you were just changing, becoming more fun, more relaxed." His confession was a dagger to my heart. He hadn't known, but he had preferred the lie. He had enjoyed the fun and relaxed version of me, even if it felt a little off. The validation I had been so desperate for was nowhere to be found. There was no grand revelation of his undying love for the real me. There was only the quiet, devastating admission that he had been complicit in his own deception, blinded by a more appealing version of his girlfriend. I stood up, the finality of the moment settling over me. "I can't do this," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't live in a life where I'm easily replaced, where my own boyfriend prefers a counterfeit." I walked to the door, my bag already packed by the entrance. I had known, even before this conversation, that this was where it would end. I couldn't look at him without seeing Arya's reflection. I couldn't be with him without wondering if he was wishing I were someone else. As I opened the door, I turned back to him one last time. He was still sitting on the couch, his head in his hands, a picture of shattered illusions. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. I was sorry for the pain, for the betrayal, for the loss of what we once had. But I was not sorry for leaving. I was leaving not just him, but the ghost of the person I used to be. As I stepped out into the bright, unforgiving sunlight, I felt a sense of liberation, a terrifying but exhilarating freedom. I had lost my boyfriend, my sense of security, and my trust in the people I loved. But I was finally, after weeks of living in a shadow, reclaiming the one thing that mattered most, myself. The weeks that followed were a period of painful, necessary deconstruction. I moved out of the apartment, leaving behind the life I had built with Liam, a life now tainted by Arya's intrusion. I found a small one-bedroom place across town, a blank canvas where I could start to paint a new picture of who I was. The first person I confronted after Liam was my family. I invited my parents over for dinner, the tension in the air so thick you could cut it with a knife. I showed them the same folder of evidence I had shown Liam. Their reaction was a mixture of shock, guilt, and a deep maternal sadness. They had been completely duped, and the realization that they had preferred Arya's lighter version of me was a source of immense pain for all of us. "We just missed you, sweetie," my mother said, her eyes filled with tears. "You seemed so stressed, and she was just so happy to be with us. We should have known better." The conversation was difficult, but it was also cathartic. It was the first step in rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of truth, however uncomfortable that truth might be. The final and most difficult piece of the puzzle was Arya. I hadn't spoken to her since our confrontation in her apartment. I knew I needed to see her again, not for a fight, but for closure. I met her at a neutral coffee shop, a public space where I hoped we could both keep our emotions in check. She looked different. The defiant, arrogant energy she had exuded before was gone, replaced by a quiet, subdued demeanor. "I'm sorry," she said, before I even had a chance to speak. The words were simple, but they felt genuine. "I was jealous, and I was angry, and I was selfish. I wanted what you had, and I thought I could just take it. I didn't think about the consequences, about the pain I would cause you." I listened to her apology, the anger I had been holding on to for so long slowly dissolving, replaced by a profound sense of pity. She hadn't just been trying to steal my life, she had been running from her own. "You hurt me, Arya," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You made me question everything about myself. You made me feel like I was nothing." "I know," she said, her voice cracking, "and I will have to live with that for the rest of my life." I didn't forgive her, not completely. Some wounds are too deep to be fully healed. But I accepted her apology, not for her sake, but for my own. I needed to let go of the bitterness in order to move forward. I left the coffee shop that day feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. The storm had passed, and while the landscape of my life was forever changed, it was also clearer. I had lost a lot, but I had also gained something invaluable, a deeper understanding of my own strength and resilience. I had been forced to confront the fragile nature of identity and to rebuild my sense of self from the ground up. I was no longer just Amelia the project manager or Amelia Liam's girlfriend. I was just Amelia, a woman who had been to hell and back and had emerged on the other side, scarred but not broken. I started a new job at a smaller firm, one that valued work-life balance. I reconnected with old friends, the ones who had known me before my life became a performance. I even started dating again, cautiously, tentatively, learning to trust not only others, but myself again. One day, a few months later, I was walking through the park when I saw my reflection in a puddle after a rainstorm. For the first time in a long time, I didn't see a stranger. I saw myself. I saw the familiar auburn hair, the green eyes, the freckles. But I also saw something new in my reflection, a strength, a clarity, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Arya had tried to steal my life, but in the end, all she had done was force me to find a better one. She had been living my life behind my back, but now I was the one in control, ready to write the next chapter on my own terms.